You're listening to episode 40 of Present Moment. Welcome to Present Moment, Mindfulness Practice and Science. I'm Ted Meissner. Present Moment is a podcast with interviews, conversations, and roundtable discussions. We speak with mindfulness teachers about their newest findings published in peer-reviewed science journals, teachers about their understanding and methods as they work with students of mindfulness, authors about their books and interests, and we also speak with everyday practitioners. The website presentmomentmindfulness.com has show notes for each episode along with resource materials. Dr. Judd Brewer joins us to speak about craving and addiction recovery with mindfulness. If you've never had an addiction, you may not have a true understanding of what that means, of how compelling the desire to get your next fix can be. Tobacco may be the most common addiction today, but how might our mindfulness practice, directed to somatic experience, help us kick the habit? Judd Brewer is a psychiatrist and internationally known expert in mindfulness training for addictions, having developed and tested novel mindfulness programs for addictions, including both in-person and application-based treatments. He has also studied the underlying neural mechanisms of mindfulness using standard and real-time fMRI, and is currently translating these findings into clinical use. He has published numerous peer-reviewed articles and book chapters, spoken at international conferences, presented to the U.S. President's Office of National Drug Control Policy, been featured at TEDx, Time Magazine, Forbes, Businessweek, NPR, and the BBC, among others. Our guest today is Dr. Judson Brewer. Judd, welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Glad to have you here. And when we last spoke with you, it was about your work at the Center for Mindfulness as the Director of Research. And today we're here to talk about another aspect of your work, which is around addiction. Tell us about your research. What have you been studying with that over the years?
I've been studying a number of things about the addictive process. It's interesting. Based on my own meditation practice, I became really interested in addictions, I think because my patients, when I was training to be an addiction psychiatrist, were speaking the same language that I'd been learning in doing meditation practice myself. They talked a lot about craving. They talked a lot about clinging, getting caught up in their experience. And so there was this natural draw as I was going through residency training at Yale to really dive into this population. And I really just fell in love with treating them. And so even about halfway through my residency training, I started my first clinical study just to see if mindfulness training could work to help with addictions. And back at that time, there were no published randomized controlled trials on mindfulness training compared to gold standard treatment. So we actually just did a simple trial where we adapted Alan Marlat's mindfulness-based relapse prevention to be a little more clinically viable. So we cut it into 2 blocks and delivered it over 8 weeks and compared it to cognitive behavioral therapy for people with alcohol and cocaine dependence. And we found that though this was a small pilot study, we found that it was as good as cognitive behavioral therapy for helping them not relapse to alcohol and drug use. And we actually found that it was better in helping them not react to a stressful stimulus, which is, stress is important because it's a big trigger for relapse and for use. So that was interesting just to see that there was a signal there with mindfulness. And we then moved to what a lot of people don't know, which is the hardest addiction to quit, smoking. And we actually stripped down the MBRP and just delivered mindfulness training. The idea was to see if we could just give the core elements of mindfulness and not add it to other things like relapse prevention, which themselves, have good efficacy, and to see how well it would work. And again, we did another randomized clinical trial. The interesting thing here is we didn't even tell people that they might be getting mindfulness training. We just told them that they would get some type of behavioral treatment for smoking cessation. And when they got to our clinic, they would find out what it is. And when they got there, they were randomized to mindfulness training or the American Lung Association's freedom from smoking, which is one of the gold standard treatments. Those two are nicely matched in a number of ways. And this time we delivered it twice a week over 4 weeks. So we gave a shortened but more intense treatment. And we found that people were twice as likely to quit smoking using mindfulness training compared to the freedom from smoking. And that's always nice to see. It was actually great to see. We're pleasantly surprised with those results. We looked into it a little bit more because we wanted to see what was actually going on there. So we looked at one of the core addictive processes called, well, a lot of people are familiar with this, positive and negative reinforcement, where, you do something that feels good. And so your brain says, do that again, and you do it again. And so that's how smoking gets reinforced. And it also gets reinforced negatively. If somebody yells at you or something bad happens, your brain says, make that go away. And if you smoke and it goes away, you learn to associate smoking in that way. And so the positive and negative reinforcement loops have been shown to propagate smoking behavior. And we just look mechanistically using data from that trial to see if mindfulness is actually getting in that core addictive loop. And we found that it was actually breaking the link between craving and behavior. So that was nice because we were starting to get a mechanism. But the other thing that was somewhat gratifying is that this was actually predicted 2,500 years ago by the Buddhist psychologists when they looked at the process that was described as dependent origination. It was actually the process that the Buddha was apparently contemplating in the night of his enlightenment. And the idea is that, craving leads to clinging, which then leads to the birth of a self, is the way that it was described. And if you can get at that core craving process where it doesn't go to the next steps, you can actually break those links of dependent origination. And here we're seeing this in a clinical trial of smoking 2,500 years later, where it's, it couldn't have been predicted better. So that's a lot of the work that we had been doing clinically with smoking and with alcohol and cocaine dependence.
Yeah, it's interesting that dependent co-origination has this first few steps that are ones you don't really have choice on. Those are the things that happen as the background circumstances in your life that lead up to something, a stimulus. And it's at that point, because you're going to have an initial positive, negative, or neutral response to it. That's normal. It's then what do you do with that? And is that where you were finding the mindfulness practice was really coming into play for addiction recovery?
Yes. So, we have no control over whether something feels pleasant or something feels unpleasant. And that's probably not a bad thing. If you touch the stove, you don't want to suddenly have that feel pleasant. That's probably a process that helps us from getting burned. So that process doesn't seem to be affected by mindfulness, but it was really at that craving. And what we taught them was to be with their craving, to ride it out, to dive in and get curious about it and see its core constitutive elements in terms of body sensations. So did it feel like tightness or tension or burning or mouth watering? And as people started to break it down into those elements, they could see that these were just body sensations that were driving their lives. I had one guy come in and said, I feel like my head's going to explode if I don't smoke. And we laughed and we said, well, if your head does explode, put it back together, give me a call, and you'll be our first documented case. But the
cephalic explosion.
Right. The idea was that, it feels like it's terrible, that something awful is going to happen. But when you break it down into, well, this is tightness. Well, is tightness head exploding? No. How about burning? No. And so you could see, oh, I can actually be with tightness for a little bit. I can be with burning. And as I can be with these, I can see that they're actually changing. And as I can see that they're changing, I can see that they're not going to get to the point where my head's going to explode. They'll get worse for a little bit and then they'll get better. And lo and behold, I've actually ridden this wave out of craving and I haven't smoked. So there's one instance where I haven't perpetuated, that cycle of dependent origination. One thing I'll point out, as probably a lot of folks know, is that cycle is described in terms of samsara, and the literal translation of that, or one, is endless wandering, because each time we spin that loop, we just perpetuate those habits.
So what led to the development of Craving to Quit, and what is that?
What is that? Yes, good question. So Craving to Quit is a app and online-based program. And the idea behind that was that I have a colleague at Yale, Kathy Carroll, who's done a lot of work with teacher fidelity and has found that therapists are really good at doing therapy, but not particularly good at following manuals, even when you're recording them and following how well they're following your manual. So she had started doing work on delivering cognitive behavioral therapy through online webinars and things like that, and web formats. So we looked to see how hard it would be to train up a bunch of trainers to deliver, mindfulness training for smoking, and also looked at this fidelity issue and looked at how we can most easily be able to reach folks who are trying to quit smoking, and decided upon developing an app instead of training a bunch of people to do this, because we could deliver the training through videos and we could deliver it through animations and through in-the-moment exercises. And the idea here is that you can get a didactic training and you can get the same training with very high fidelity, actually perfect fidelity.
Exact fidelity.
100% fidelity. And you can get that delivered in a very accessible way whenever you need it. And you can go back to it over and over again. The other piece you can get is for the key points, and the points that I was drawing on the blackboard and drawing out these loops of, associative learning and whatnot. We took those and put those into animations, and we worked with two animators who were fabulous folks. These folks, I think their company is Obtuse Animations, and they both had quit smoking using mindfulness. So they jumped right on board when we proposed this idea to them. So we can deliver these key points through animations that keep people engaged. And then the third piece is we can give them in-the-moment exercises. So as part of the Craving to Quit program, we have this button called the Wantometer. So anytime you want a cigarette, you can click on there and you can rate how strong your craving is. You can check in to see what triggered it. And then you can be walked through an exercise of the RAIN exercise, which was the in-the-moment exercise shown to be directly correlated to people quitting smoking and breaking the link between craving and smoking. And the key here is that you don't learn to smoke in your therapist's office. You don't learn to smoke in the hospital. You learn to smoke in your car, on your front porch, outside of work. And so you can bring this treatment right to this context-dependent learning place where you've learned to smoke. And that's really critical, because that's the place that you're most likely to be successful extinguishing it, if you can bring some treatment there. And in our in-person training, people were saying, oh yeah, what was that thing, that RAIN exercise? I forgot what it was. And I vowed, I said, never again. So we put it right there front and center in the app. So anytime they have an urge to smoke, they can click on it. And the idea is that they'll learn it to the point where they don't need they don't need that reminder anymore, because it will become their new habit.
So how does the app compare with other smoking cessation apps? What sets it apart?
It's set apart in several ways. One is most other apps that are out there for smoking will give you, there'll be a cigarette counter, or they'll tell you how much money you save, or they'll tell you how bad it is to smoke and show you pictures of, diseased lungs and things like that. And all of those things can be helpful. Craving to Quit has a cigarette counter, and it actually automatically helps you taper the number of cigarettes you're smoking from when you start to your quit date, so that you can be least likely to have withdrawal and things like that. It also tells you how much money you save, and it has all those whiz-bang features. But the real part that sets it apart is that, well, it's based on an evidence-based trial, so that no other apps right now that are on the market have, an evidence base behind them. And the other piece is that it's a 21-day training. So you get daily exercises every day that slowly build your familiarity and then your practice of mindfulness. So by the end of the 21 days, it's not that you're an expert, but you have a really good foundation and you've gone through a course of mindfulness. The other piece that it has is it's got a direct link to our online community where people can journal, they can ask me questions, they can get a tip of the week, and they can do all these other things that help them stay engaged with the community. The third jewel in Buddhism is Sangha, and we can provide that online in a way that is scalable.
I wanted to ask, have you noticed or gotten any feedback from people around, they started this to quit smoking, and they were successful in that, but they've also discovered this practice that has impacted other areas of their lives. Have you had any feedback or any stories about that?
I've had a number of people write to me saying, hey, I noticed this app. I don't smoke, but I want to use it for X, Y, or Z. They say, is there going to be an app out for this or this or this? And I say, well, not yet. But, we've had somebody said, I have something that has to do with watching internet things a lot. And I said, well, you can use this for watching internet things a lot. And I think this was a particular type of internet that this person was watching that they were probably embarrassed to talk about.
Puppies. I know. Playing puppies. It's an addiction.
Right.
Really, you can get over playing puppies and watching that online.
Absolutely. So we've had people use this for a number of different types of things, including internet type addictions that they might be embarrassed to talk about, because the core addictive loop is the same. We get this urge to do whatever the behavior is, whether it's smoking or biting our nails or eating too much. And Craving to Quit it's centered around smoking, but the core habit loop is the same. The core mindfulness practices are the same. It's just, you pick your different stimulus and your different triggers and your different behavior.
Judd, was there anything else you wanted to share with the listeners just about addiction recovery itself?
It's interesting because addictions are so hard to overcome, whether it's smoking or overeating or whatever. And, people say, why is this so hard? Well, it turns out that this is probably an evolutionarily conserved process that was set up so that we would remember where food is. So, say, well, why can't we develop a pill? Why can't we do these things? Well, it's because this is a core part of how we learn. And I think just knowing that is helpful for folks who get really frustrated when they're trying to change a behavior, whether it's smoking or something else, just to hang in there and to know that this is part of how our brains are set up. And if we really just pay attention to this stuff and are patient, these are habits that we can change. The other thing I'll mention is that one thing that's paradoxical about this treatment is that we actually encourage people to smoke at the beginning. And we get a lot of paradoxical comments that are like, what? I thought this was smoking cessation. But the key here is to smoke and pay attention when you're smoking. And when people pay attention, they start to see what they're actually getting from what they're doing. And this goes right back to the early psychology where I'll paraphrase, but the idea is, it wasn't until I explored gratification to its end that knowledge and vision arose. So this idea in the suttas was that, when you really pay attention to your behavior, you see what behavior is helpful and what behavior is unhelpful. And you start to become disenchanted. And, it's like pulling down Santa Claus's beard. You can't pretend that you didn't see that. And you can't pretend that Santa Claus is real. And just like that with addictions, you can't pretend that cigarettes taste as good as you thought they did when you suddenly realize that they don't. And for a lot of people, that's the beginning of the end. And for smokers, that's why we start right there. And even, we're starting to develop a program that's going to be called Eat Right Now because, sugar is more addictive than cocaine, related to the idea around that this was an evolutionarily conserved process. And the idea is even with eating, you can pay attention, when you overeat or when you eat unhealthy food as compared to healthy food, when you really look to see what the reward was, you typically will see that, it wasn't as good as you remembered it to be.
Perfect. Well, we're going to have a link to your Huffington Post blog as well as the website cravingtoquit.com. Our guest today, Dr. Judson Brewer. Judd, thanks for being here.
Thanks again for having me, Ted.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to learn more about something you've heard in today's podcast, please come visit the website at presentmomentmindfulness.com. You'll find an entire webpage devoted to this and every episode. You can comment on the episode page and find show notes and other helpful resources for your mindfulness practice. The shakuhachi music heard on Present Moment is used by permission and through the generosity of musician Rodrigo Rodriguez. His website is linked on the Present Moment website on the About Podcast Music page. Sound editing, mixing, and mastering provided by the generosity of Anthony Dominello of StructureFromSound.com. Until next time, remember, every moment you have a choice. Make it the best you can. See you next time on Present Moment.